While a progressive friend of mine and I lamented our shared disgust for the two-party duopoly, he was shocked when I expressed a willingness to vote for a Republican. I voted for Obama twice, Sanders in the 2016 primary, Stein in the 2016 general election, Sanders in the 2020 primary, and nearly vomited in the parking lot after voting for Biden in the 2020 general election, because my choices were Biden, Trump, or Joe Jorgensen. So, how can someone with my voting record be willing to vote for someone whose name has an R beside it? The answer is that I currently vote based on policies, not platitudes or partisanship. I participate in every local, state, and federal election, including primaries because I consider them even more important than general elections. In every election, I examine the platforms of every candidate on the ballot. This takes time and effort, especially compared to the impact of the individual vote I'll cast, but I think it's worth it in the interest of taking the responsibility and limited power of my vote seriously. So what kind of Republican candidate would get my vote? Well, let's first consider what it means to be a Republican, according to them, not me or any of you or other pinko commie socialists out there. So I went to the GOP's website to find out for myself what tenets you need to uphold in order to fit the mold of a good Republican. I found what their website calls the 11 Principles for American Renewal. Let's look at each one and see how many it's possible for me to get on board with if a Republican candidate were to approach it from the right angle. 1. Constitution. Our Constitution should be preserved, valued, and honored. So, right off the bat, this one isn't a deal breaker for me, but if it's a candidate's top priority, it's probably not going to be hard for me to find a better candidate. The Constitution was pretty damn good for a document ratified by all states as of 1789. Now, is it pretty cool that we can largely still rely on a document that was written that long ago? Yes. Is it impressive that it's only had 27 amendments in over 2 centuries? Kind of. But it's also kind of a problem how inflexible it is. I mean, one of those amendments is just undoing a previous one about prohibition. The number of people who can write, propose, and vote on those amendments is relatively small compared to the over 328 million population at large. By the way, the population of the country is about 84 times larger now than it was back then. And we've come a long way as a civilization since a time when muskets were the best firearms, electricity wouldn't exist for another century, and if you wanted to send someone a message in another town, you had to do it by horseback or wooden ship. Maybe it's okay for us to recognize that those guys didn't have it all figured out and reconstruct the entire Constitution. Of course, we're not in anything close to an appropriate political climate for doing that right now, so I could get behind a candidate who wants to keep the Constitution the way it is. 2. Economy. We need to start growing America's economy instead of Washington's economy so that hardworking Americans can see better wages and more opportunity. Okay, I can work with that. You may notice that these 11 principles largely just ask you to agree that something is a problem or that a solution is needed, but they don't get into the weeds about how that needs to be done. So I could definitely vote for a Republican who said we need to grow America's economy and get better wages for hardworking Americans. Therefore, we're going to end the outsourcing of labor for products that can be manufactured right here in the USA. That's likely going to make products more expensive, but it's going to actually create good-paying American jobs while ending our exploitation of cheap foreign labor. There are already companies like American Giant who have to charge more for their products, but keep every step of their supply line and manufacturing on American soil. If a Republican wanted to push for laws or tax incentives to end outsourcing and encourage good-paying American manufacturing jobs like that model, I'd get behind that. 3. Budget. We need to pass a balanced budget amendment to the Constitution, make government more efficient, and leave the next generation with opportunity, not debt. So on the face of it, it's interesting to me that their first principle involved preserving the Constitution, and the third one says we need to amend it. Though, like I said, I'm all for making the Constitution better. I'm also in favor of a balanced budget. I don't think anyone wants our country to increasingly plunge into what already seems like insurmountable debt. But this principle just says that we need to be more efficient. So I'd love to support a candidate who takes the massive inefficiencies of our national budget on by saying things like this. In 2019, we spent 53% of our national budget on the military, not counting the 6% we spent on our veterans. And our service members and veterans still aren't compensated well enough for their service. Those combined expenses took up 8.4 times more than the second largest slice of our budgetary pie. We need to cut spending to our military-industrial complex immediately, especially if we ever want to reverse our growing national debt. It's kind of wild to me that the GOP candidates tend to have this contradictory position as being both deficit hawks and pro-military spending. Imagine if a household went into severe debt from spending 59% of its income on guns, alarm systems, and private security guards every year, and the mother said, "Our debt is getting out of hand. We need to spend less money on groceries, clothing, and school supplies." Most people who work in government jobs will also attest to great bureaucratic inefficiency in their system. So I'm in favor of a Republican who wants to keep the social programs we currently have, but make them cost less by making them function more efficiently. Number 4. Healthcare. We need to start over with a real healthcare reform that puts patients and their doctors in charge, not unelected bureaucrats in Washington. I'm excited to learn that Republicans want to rebuild healthcare from the ground up. I'm a bit confused about this principle compared to what I hear from most GOP politicians. We've just heard them talk about how they need to eliminate the inefficiencies in our government and that they want to rebuild healthcare. The Republican who would get my vote would argue that they can accomplish both of those through some version of universal health care. That would also accomplish the goal of putting people and their doctors in charge of their health care, because right now, employers and multi-billion-dollar middleman insurance companies who profit from providing as little coverage while charging as much money as possible are in charge of the system. Our current system leaves Americans paying double or more what single-payer countries do for the same medications and other medical vendor products. Relying on private insurance companies doesn't make the government effectively smaller. It just means they're outsourcing government jobs to profit-driven private companies. Additionally, relying on employers to cover employee health care stifles the growth of business and makes those companies and their employees pay for that service that should be paid for with taxes. That gets back to the problem of our extremely bloated, wasteful military spending that could be used for services that are far more beneficial to the bulk of our citizens in direct and tangible ways. Number 5, veterans. Our veterans have earned our respect and gratitude, and no veteran should have to wait in line for months or years just to see a doctor. The Republican I'd vote for would argue to expand the version of universal health care that our active duty troops receive to all members of the armed services, whether they are active duty or not, who have served for at least one 4-year enlistment period. And it's baffling that we spend more of our annual budget on care for our veterans than we do on education, only to have a system that remains inadequate for our vets. Number 6, security. Keeping America safe and strong requires a strong military, growing the economy, energy independence, and secure borders. According to Statista.com, when accounting for weapon quantity and diversity, natural resources, available industries, manpower, and financial stability, the U.S. has the most powerful military in the world. We have around 800 military bases spanning at least 73 countries outside of our own, while 0 countries have military bases in the USA. So I'd vote for a candidate who recognizes that our military is more than strong enough in its current form. The rest of this principle gets covered in others, so I think we're done here. Number 7, education. Every child should have an equal opportunity to get a great education. No parent should be forced to send their child to a failing school. I agree with this claim. That's why the Republican candidate who'd get my vote would be committed to providing equitable resources to all public schools. Schools are currently funded based on local property taxes. It's common for students born and living in poor districts to attend schools that have thousands of dollars less per student than those in more affluent neighboring cities, let alone the disparity across state lines. For example, Piedmont City Unified School District in California spends nearly $7,000 more per student than Hertford County, North Carolina. Students in Piedmont come from homes with median annual incomes just over $224,600. Hertford students come from homes with a median annual income just over $30,700. Does it shock you that Piedmont has a graduation rate of 99% with an 87% reading proficiency, while Hertford's graduation rate is 79% with a reading proficiency of 27%? I'd vote for a Republican who recognizes that this disgusting inequity in our public schools is a major factor in why we have failing public schools, and that it should be one of the first things we work to fix, because you'd have to be a special kind of stupid to ignore the financial conditions of those students' home and school lives and just assume that the teachers in Piedmont are simply way better and try harder than teachers in Hertford. And that's what just comparing public schools to each other, let alone the absurdity of concluding that private and charter schools who get to handpick their students are superior to public schools because they do better on tests. Therefore, it's the public schools that are the problem. If a Republican can avoid being that uninformed about the challenges we face in education and spit some truth on the matter, he or she could get my vote. Number 8, poverty. The best anti-poverty program is a strong family and a good job, so our focus should be on getting people out of poverty by lifting up all people and helping them find work. Now, this was interesting to read. I often hear conservative rhetoric about how the government just needs to stay out of people's lives and leave them alone, but here's a principle of their own platform saying we need to solve poverty with strong families. Of course, I can't comment much on that because their platform doesn't define what makes a family strong or what methods they think the government should use to impact families. It does state that we should lift up all people and help them find work. There's growing evidence to show direct cash relief, preferably through UBI programs, are the most promising ways to lift people out of poverty by creating an income floor from which everyone benefits. It would also be a method that relies far less on bureaucracy like welfare programs do. But even if a Republican isn't in favor of those programs, I'd still vote for one who believed in lifting people up and into jobs, with the government paying for community college and trade schools of all citizens who need them to better themselves. Number 9. Values. Our country should value the traditions of family, life, religious liberty, and hard work. This is another one that's strange for me to hear. I know that conservatives are often talking about these values, but it's unclear to me how this principle is supposed to drive a candidate's policy. I don't think it's any politician's business to influence what citizens value, what they do with their lives, who they choose to worship, or even how hard they work, as long as they're paying their share of taxes and they aren't hurting anyone else. However, if they actually want to enforce things like valuing hard work, I'm intrigued. If a candidate insists that workers who spend 10 hours each day operating jackhammers in the blazing sun deserve more pay than their CEO bosses who sit at their computers in air-conditioned offices all day, that's a Republican stump speech I'd love to hear. Number 10, energy. We should make America energy independent by encouraging investment in domestic energy, lowering prices, and creating jobs at home. This is my favorite principle of the Republican platform so far. I don't even have to work very hard to interpret it in a way that I could get behind it. This is one of the several things on the list that are so far divorced from how the Republicans in D.C. currently behave that I'm, again, shocked to see it articulated here. I would love to vote for a Republican who runs on investing in renewable domestic energy, lowering costs through innovative green energy programs, and creating jobs with a boom in the solar, wind, geothermal, and hydro sectors. Of course, if their interpretation of this platform plank is that we need to spend more money on finite, rapidly depleting fossil fuels with pipelines and environmentally ravishing fracking practices, then of course I'm not voting for them. But I'd gladly vote for a Republican who wants to accomplish that exact goal in the way that we should be striving to achieve it in the current year. 11. Immigration. We need an immigration system that secures our borders, upholds the law, and boosts our economy. I'm technically fine with all of this as long as the laws we're upholding make sense and the way we enforce them is humane. There are two major ways a politician could strive to accomplish this Republican goal that would secure my vote. A. Crack down on companies that currently break the law by exploiting undocumented immigrants by paying them sub-minimum wage every day. If there were no businesses willing to exploit the cheap labor of illegal immigrants, the vast majority of them would have no reason to take the risks they currently do by crossing the border. Our current method is to blame the tens of thousands of people who seek opportunities to support their family, rather than enforcing the law that a relatively small number of extremely wealthy people are breaking so they can get away with paying immigrants for work that no American citizens are willing to do for the same price. B. Make it extremely easy to achieve American work visas and create ample opportunities to parlay those work visas into full-fledged American citizenship. If someone is willing to come here from another country and accrue something like 12 months of work for American employers, they deserve their citizenship as much or more as any of us who were born here. This means the Border Patrol can focus on keeping out and or deporting the much smaller number of actual bad actor immigrants, while the ones who just want to work can do so. It makes it essential for companies to pay those people a fair wage and for their wages to be properly taxed. A politician who wants to secure our borders, uphold intelligent laws, and improve our economy in that way definitely has my vote. I learned something by really digging into the RNC's policies and values, and I hope you did too. For the most part, at least on paper, the RNC's platform is vague enough to be pretty popular with most Americans, including Democrat politicians. It's the backward and proven ineffective right-wing policies they extrapolate from their platform where they go wrong. Everyone wants a strong economy, for example. Progressives simply understand that several decades of tax cuts for the wealthy have given us conclusive proof that a trickle-down approach hinders our economy rather than helping it. Most people don't actually have a problem with the government being big as long as it's using our tax dollars to efficiently deliver big benefits. The left wants those benefits to include education, school, and health care, while the right wants it to go to the military-industrial complex and people who literally already have more money than they could spend in 5 lifetimes if they were trying really hard. So while I hope I've explained that it's very much possible for me to vote for Republican, it doesn't look like I will be anytime soon.